My name is Camille Donahue, 29 years old, and my perfect wedding day nearly fell apart when my own father publicly disowned me in front of everyone I love. After giving him a place of honor at my wedding despite our troubled past, he repaid me with the cruelest betrayal. He thought I would just accept his rejection quietly as I always had, but this time he went too far. The consequences went far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Before continuing my story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Like and subscribe for more family secrets nobody tells. I spent months planning my wedding to Daniel. Every detail was meticulously arranged, from the elegant outdoor venue with its sweeping views of the Pennsylvania countryside to the delicate peonies and roses that adorned each table. My dress was everything I had dreamed of since childhood. A fitted bodice with lace overlay that flowed into a subtle A-line skirt. I felt beautiful, hopeful, and despite everything, complete. The morning of my wedding day dawned with clear skies and gentle sunshine, perfect weather for our outdoor ceremony. My bridesmaids bustled around me, helping with makeup and hair, popping champagne, and filling the bridal suite with laughter. My mother, Susan, fussed over every detail, her eyes occasionally misting with tears of joy. But beneath all the celebration, there was a knot of anxiety in my stomach that wouldn't go away. "Has he arrived yet?" I asked my mom for what must have been the 10th time that morning. She hesitated before answering. "Not yet, honey, but there's still time." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. My relationship with my father, Richard Donahue, had been strained for most of my adult life. After he left my mother when I was 16, our contact became sporadic and painful. He missed my high school graduation, my college graduation, and countless birthdays. When I called to tell him about my engagement, his response was so lukewarm that I nearly cried after hanging up. But still, I wanted him there. Despite everything, he was my father. I had reserved a place for him in the front row, next to my mother. I had even asked him to walk me down the aisle, alongside my stepfather Tom, who had been more of a dad to me over the past decade than my biological father ever was. "Don't get your hopes up too high," my best friend and maid of honor Jessica warned gently as she adjusted my veil. "You know how he is." "He promised he'd come," I said, more to convince myself than her. "He RSVP'd yes." Jessica squeezed my shoulder but said nothing more. She had witnessed firsthand the disappointment my father had caused me over the years. As the ceremony time approached, guests began filling the rows of white chairs on the lawn. Through the window of the bridal suite, I could see Daniel standing nervously at the altar, handsome in his navy suit, occasionally checking his watch. My stepfather Tom knocked on the door, ready to escort me. "He's here," Tom said quietly when he entered. "Just arrived. Looks like he came straight from work." Relief flooded through me. He had come after all. Maybe this really would be the perfect day. Maybe it would mark not just the beginning of my life with Daniel, but also a new chapter in my relationship with my father. Tom offered me his arm, his kind eyes full of pride. "Ready, Camille?" I took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready?" The music began, and one by one, my bridesmaids made their way down the aisle. Then it was my turn. As I stepped onto the white runner with Tom beside me, I scanned the crowd for my father. And there he was, seated in the front row next to my mother, looking uncomfortable in a suit that seemed slightly too small for his frame. Our eyes met briefly, and I offered a small smile. He didn't return it. I tried not to let his coldness affect me as I continued toward Daniel, whose face lit up at the sight of me. This was our day, and I wouldn't let anything spoil it. The ceremony proceeded beautifully. Daniel and I exchanged vows we had written ourselves, promising to support each other through whatever life brought our way. As we sealed our union with a kiss, the guests erupted in applause and cheers. It wasn't until the reception that everything fell apart. After dinner, it was time for the speeches. My mother spoke beautifully about love and partnership. Daniel's parents warmly welcomed me to their family. Then the DJ announced that my father wanted to say a few words. I froze. This wasn't planned. But maybe, just maybe, he wanted to make amends. to publicly acknowledge our relationship and wish us well. For a moment, hope bloomed in my chest. My father stood, champagne glass in hand, and cleared his throat. The room fell silent. "I wasn't planning to speak today," he began, his voice flat. "But I feel I need to clear something up." A strange tension filled the air. Daniel reached for my hand under the table. "I'm not sure why I was invited as a guest of honor today," my father continued, his eyes not meeting mine, "or why I was asked to participate in this ceremony at all." The room grew unnervingly quiet. I could feel every eye on us, on me, as my father continued to speak, his voice growing colder with each word. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Richard Donahue. And contrary to what the program says, I don't have a daughter." Gasps rippled through the reception hall. My mother half rose from her seat, her face contorted with fury. But my stepfather gently pulled her back down, whispering something in her ear. I sat frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Daniel's hand tightened around mine. "I've been very clear about this for years," my father continued, seemingly oblivious to the shock on everyone's faces. "When I left this family, I left it completely. I don't know why there was an expectation that I would play along with this charade today." The words hit me like physical blows. Each syllable carried 13 years of rejection, packed into one devastating public statement. My chest felt tight, my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Not here, not now. "So while I wish the bride and groom well," he concluded, raising his glass slightly, "I think it's important that we're all clear about where we stand." Then he set down his glass and walked out of the reception hall without looking back. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the room erupted into shocked murmurs. Daniel's mother rushed to my side, putting her arm around my shoulders. My own mother was being physically restrained by my stepfather from going after my father. Jessica was already on her feet, her face a mask of protective rage. "I need some air," I managed to whisper to Daniel. He nodded, understanding immediately, and helped me to my feet. Together, we slipped out a side door onto the venue's terrace, away from the prying eyes of our guests. Outside, the evening air was cool against my feverish skin. I gulped it down, trying to steady my breathing, trying to process what had just happened. Daniel stood beside me, silent, giving me space while letting me know he was there. "I'm so sorry," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "Camille, I'm so sorry." I shook my head, unable to speak. The tears came then, hot and fast, streaking my carefully applied makeup. Daniel pulled me against his chest, and I sobbed into his suit jacket, not caring that I was probably ruining it. "How could he?" I choked out between sobs. "How could he do that? Today of all days?" Daniel had no answer. No one could have an answer for that kind of cruelty. After a few minutes, Jessica found us. Her face softened when she saw my tear-streaked face, and she immediately pulled me into a fierce hug. "Everyone's talking about what an absolute jerk he is," she assured me. "No one blames you, Camille. Everyone's on your side." "What am I supposed to do now?" I asked, pulling back to look at her. "Go back in there and pretend everything's fine? That my father didn't just disown me in front of everyone I care about?" "You hold your head high," Jessica said firmly. "You go back in there and you show everyone that Richard Donahue doesn't have the power to ruin your wedding day. You dance with your husband, you cut your cake, and you celebrate the family you've chosen, the one that actually deserves you." I looked to Daniel, who nodded in agreement. "She's right," he said. "Don't let him win, Camille." I took a deep, shuddering breath and squared my shoulders. They were right. I wouldn't let my father steal this day from me. I had spent too many years letting his absence and disapproval shape my life. No more. "Okay," I said, wiping away the last of my tears. "But first I need to fix my makeup." Jessica grinned. "Already on it." She produced my makeup bag from seemingly nowhere. "Emergency supplies." I came prepared. As Jessica helped me repair the damage, Daniel went back inside to let everyone know we'd be returning shortly. I could hear the music starting up again, life returning to the reception despite the dramatic interruption. "You know," Jessica said as she carefully reapplied my eyeliner, "your father just showed everyone exactly why you're better off without him. That was a gift, in a weird, terrible way." I considered her words. There was truth there. For years, I had carried the burden of our strained relationship, wondering what I had done wrong, why I wasn't enough for him to stay, to care. I had made excuses for him to others, painted a picture of a complicated relationship rather than admitting the simple, painful truth. My father didn't want to be my father. And now everyone knew. There was a strange relief in that, buried beneath the humiliation and heartbreak. When we returned to the reception, I was met with sympathetic looks and supportive squeezes of the hand. My mother immediately enveloped me in a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered. "I should have known he would pull something like this. I should have protected you." I pulled back to look at her. "It's not your fault, Mom. It's his. It's always been his." My stepfather, Tom, approached next, his kind face creased with concern. "Camille, if you'd prefer, I can ask everyone to leave. We can end this now, no questions asked." I shook my head. "No, this is still my wedding day. Our wedding day," I added, reaching for Daniel's hand. "And I still want to celebrate it with the people who actually care about me." Tom smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "That's my girl." The DJ announced the first dance then, and Daniel led me to the center of the dance floor. As we swayed to our chosen song, his arms strong and secure around me, I gradually felt the tension begin to leave my body. "I love you," Daniel murmured against my ear. "More than anything. And I promise you, our family, the one we create together, will be different." I looked up at him, at his earnest face and loving eyes, and I believed him. With all my heart, I believed him. As the night progressed, I danced with Tom, with Daniel's father, with my friends. I smashed cake into Daniel's face and laughed when he returned the favor. I tossed my bouquet directly at Jessica, who caught it with a whoop of delight. And gradually, the sting of my father's words began to fade, overshadowed by the love that surrounded me. By the time Daniel and I departed for our honeymoon suite, showered with rose petals and well wishes, I had almost managed to push the incident from my mind. Almost. But as I lay in bed that night, Daniel sleeping peacefully beside me, the words came back to haunt me. "I don't have a daughter." 6 simple words that confirmed what I had suspected for years but had never wanted to believe. My father had discarded me, completely and publicly. And despite the brave face I had put on for my guests, despite the wonderful moments that had filled the remainder of the evening, a part of me was shattered. I stared at the ceiling, tears silently tracking down my temples, and wondered what would happen next. Would I ever see my father again? Did I even want to? And most importantly, how would I move forward from here? 2 weeks later, Daniel and I returned from our honeymoon in Hawaii, tanned and happy despite everything that had happened at the wedding. The beautiful beaches, tropical drinks, and time alone together had been exactly what I needed to begin healing from my father's cruel words. For days at a time, I managed not to think about it at all, losing myself instead in the joy of being newly married to the love of my life. But reality came crashing back the moment we arrived home. There, mixed in with the pile of mail, was a small package addressed to me in my father's distinctive handwriting. I stared at it, my stomach knotting with dread. "You don't have to open it now," Daniel said softly, noticing my reaction. "Or ever, if you don't want to." I nodded, setting the package aside and focusing on unpacking our suitcases. But it loomed in my peripheral vision, an unwelcome reminder that no matter how far I ran, the pain of my father's rejection would follow me. That night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, I crept downstairs and picked up the package. It was lightweight, about the size of a small book. For a long moment, I just held it, debating whether to throw it away unopened. But curiosity won out, as it always did when it came to my father. Maybe this was an apology. Maybe he regretted what he'd said at the wedding. Maybe finally, he was reaching out in a meaningful way. I carefully unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one she had promised would be mine when I married. Along with it was a note that read simply, "This belongs to my mother's granddaughter. I have no use for it." No apology, no explanation, just a cold acknowledgement that while he might not claim me as his daughter, he couldn't deny my place in the family tree. It was somehow worse than if he had sent nothing at all. I closed the box with a snap and slid it into a drawer, fighting back tears of frustration. Even now, he couldn't give me what I really wanted: his love, his approval, his presence in my life. Just another disappointment in a lifetime of disappointments. The next morning, I told Daniel about the package and its contents. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his eyes full of concern. I shrugged, attempting nonchalance. "Nothing. What can I do? He's made his feelings perfectly clear." Daniel hesitated. Maybe it's time to stop trying with him, Camille. Stop giving him chances to hurt you." I knew he was right. I had spent years making excuses for my father's behavior, years hoping that eventually he would change, that he would realize what he was missing by pushing me away. But the wedding had been my final attempt at reconciliation, and he had thrown it back in my face in the most public, humiliating way possible. "You're right," I said finally. "I'm done." And I meant it. I was done chasing after a man who had made it abundantly clear that he didn't want to be caught. Done trying to earn the love of someone who was incapable of giving it. Done hurting myself in the pursuit of a relationship that would never fulfill me. The next few months passed in a blur of thank you notes, settling into our new home together, and the general adjustment to married life. I threw myself into work at the marketing firm where I'd recently been promoted, grateful for the distraction. Daniel and I joined a volleyball league, spent weekends exploring new hiking trails, and began talking about starting a family of our own someday. Life moved forward, as it always does. But the wound my father had inflicted festered beneath the surface. I found myself growing increasingly irritable, snapping at Daniel over minor issues, lying awake at night replaying my father's words at the wedding. I started avoiding social gatherings where I might have to explain my father's absence or behavior. The shame of being publicly rejected by my own parent was a burden I carried everywhere. "I think you should talk to someone," Daniel suggested one night after I'd burst into tears over a burned dinner, a disproportionate reaction that we both knew had nothing to do with the food. "A professional, I mean." I bristled at first, defensive. "I'm fine. I just need time." "It's been 3 months, Camille," he said gently. "And you're not fine. You're hurting. And it's affecting everything. Your sleep, your work, us." He was right again, though I was reluctant to admit it. The truth was, I didn't know how to process what had happened, how to make peace with a rejection so complete and so public. I didn't know how to stop wanting the approval of a man who had made it his mission to withhold it. So I started seeing Dr. Winters, a therapist specializing in family trauma. Our first session was awkward and halting. I wasn't sure what to say or where to begin. How do you summarize a lifetime of complicated feelings in an hour? "Tell me about your father," Dr. Winters prompted, her voice kind but neutral. I laughed humorlessly. "Which version? The father I wanted him to be or the father he actually was?" "Let's start with the latter." So I told her everything. How my father had been distant even before he left, more interested in his work and hobbies than in family life. How the divorce had seemed to free him from the burden of parenthood. How he'd missed important milestones, forgotten birthdays, made promises he never kept. How I'd continued to invite him to events, continued to hope for a change, continued to believe that somewhere deep down, he must love me. "And now?" Dr. Winters asked. "After what happened at your wedding, how do you feel about him now?" I struggled to articulate the complex stew of emotions. "Angry," I said finally. "Heartbroken, humiliated, but also relieved in a way. At least now I know for sure. At least now I can stop hoping." Over the next few weeks, Dr. Winters helped me see patterns I hadn't recognized before. How my relationship with my father had affected my other relationships, making me overly eager to please, terrified of abandonment, quick to assume I was at fault when things went wrong. How I had internalized his rejection, coming to believe on some level that I was unlovable, unworthy of attention and care. Your father's inability to love you properly is about him, not you, she told me during one particularly difficult session. It's his failure, his loss, not yours. Intellectually, I knew she was right, but emotionally, it was harder to accept. How could a parent not love their child? What was so fundamentally wrong with me that my own father could discard me so easily? It was Daniel who helped me begin to truly believe it wasn't my fault. One evening, after a particularly grueling therapy session, I came home emotionally exhausted. Daniel took one look at my face and opened his arms. I fell into them, letting him hold me as I cried. "I keep thinking about our future kids," I admitted when the tears had subsided. "What if I'm like him? What if I can't love them the way they deserve?" Daniel pulled back to look at me, his expression serious. "Camille, that's not possible. You are the most loving person I know. The fact that you're even worried about it proves how different you are from your father. But what if—" "No," he interrupted firmly. "Listen to me. Your father's choices are about him. His coldness, his distance. That's who he is. It has nothing to do with you, and it doesn't define you. You get to decide what kind of parent you'll be, what kind of family we'll build." As the weeks turned into months, I slowly began to believe him, to believe in myself and my capacity for love, to believe that I could break the cycle of rejection and distance that had defined my relationship with my father. But I knew that true healing would require one more step, one I wasn't sure I was ready to take. I would need to confront my father directly, not to reconcile, but to find closure, to say all the things I had never been brave enough to say before. The question was, after everything that had happened, would he even agree to see me? It took me another month to work up the courage to contact my father. Every time I picked up the phone, I remembered his cold words at my wedding and put it back down. But Dr. Winters gently encouraged me to try, not for reconciliation, but for my own peace of mind. "What's the worst that could happen?" she asked during one session. "He could reject me again," I replied immediately. "Make me feel foolish for even trying." "And could you survive that?" she pressed. "You've already survived his worst public rejection. Would a private one break you?" I considered her words carefully. The truth was, I had survived. Despite the pain, despite the humiliation, I was still standing. I had a loving husband, supportive friends, a career I enjoyed. My father's rejection hadn't destroyed me. It had just wounded me, and wounds could heal. "No," I said finally. "It wouldn't break me." So on a crisp October afternoon, 6 months after my wedding, I called my father. I half expected him not to answer, but to my surprise, he picked up on the third ring. "Hello?" His voice was exactly as I remembered it, brisk, businesslike, perpetually impatient. "Dad," I said, the word feeling strange in my mouth after everything that had happened. "It's Camille." There was a long pause. For a moment, I thought he might hang up. "What do you want?" he asked finally. I took a deep breath. "I'd like to meet with you, to talk. There are things I need to say to you." Another pause, this one even longer. "I don't think that's a good idea." "I'm not asking for a reconciliation," I clarified, my voice steadier than I felt. "I don't expect anything from you anymore. I just need to say some things, face to face. After that, we never have to see each other again if that's what you want." I could almost hear him weighing his options, calculating the path of least resistance. Eventually, practicality won out. "Fine, one meeting. Next Thursday, coffee at Brewster's downtown, 3 p.m. I can give you 15 minutes. He hung up before I could respond, typical of his abrupt manner. But it didn't matter. I had what I wanted, a chance to speak my truth. The intervening week passed both too quickly and too slowly. I spent hours planning what to say, rehearsing lines in my head, imagining his responses. Daniel offered to come with me for moral support, but I declined. This was something I needed to do alone. When Thursday arrived, I dressed carefully in an outfit that made me feel confident. Black slacks, a silk blouse in deep blue, low heels. Professional, put together, adult. I wanted to face my father not as the hurt child he had abandoned, but as the strong woman I had become despite him. I arrived at Brewster's 10 minutes early, choosing a quiet table in the corner where we wouldn't be overheard. My father walked in exactly at 3 p.m., punctual as always. He looked older than he had at the wedding, the lines around his mouth deeper, his hair grayer. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. He sat down across from me without ordering anything. "I have a meeting at 3:30, he said by way of greeting. "So let's make this quick." I nodded, suddenly nervous despite all my preparation. "Thank you for coming." He made an impatient gesture with his hand. "You said you had things to say. So say them." I took a deep breath and met his gaze directly. "What you did at my wedding was cruel. Unnecessarily cruel. If you didn't want to be there, you could have declined the invitation. If you felt uncomfortable, you could have left quietly. Instead, you chose to humiliate me on what should have been the happiest day of my life." My father's expression didn't change. I said what needed to be said. I've never pretended that our relationship was something it's not. "No, you just pretended I didn't exist," I countered, my voice rising slightly. "Do you have any idea what that did to me growing up? Wondering why my own father didn't want me? Blaming myself for not being enough to make you stay?" He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Your mother has filled your head with nonsense. My leaving had nothing to do with you." "Then why?" I pressed. "Why have you been so determined to push me away? Why can't you love me?" For the first time, something like emotion flickered across his face. Discomfort, perhaps, or guilt. But it was quickly replaced by his usual mask of indifference. "I'm not built that way," he said flatly. "The whole family thing. It wasn't for me. I should never have gotten married, never had kids. I realized that too late." His words hurt, but not as much as they once would have. I was beginning to understand that his coldness was indeed about him, not me. Some people simply lacked the capacity for the kind of love that should come naturally to a parent. "I spent years trying to earn your love," I said quietly. "Years blaming myself for your absence. Years making excuses for you to others. I'm done with that now." He nodded, checking his watch. "Is that all? Because I need to—" "No, that's not all," I interrupted, surprising both of us with my firmness. "I need you to know that I'm going to be okay. Better than okay. I have a husband who loves me completely, friends who support me, a mother who has always been there for me, a stepfather who has shown me what a real dad looks like. I'm building a good life, a happy life, without you in it." I leaned forward, making sure he was really hearing me. "And someday, I might have children of my own. And I promise you, they will never, ever wonder if they're loved. They will never doubt their worth because of a parent's rejection. I'm breaking that cycle, right here, right now." Something shifted in my father's eyes then. Not warmth exactly, but perhaps a grudging respect. "You sound like your mother when she gets fired up," he remarked, the closest thing to a compliment he had given me in years. I smiled slightly. "Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment." He checked his watch again and stood up. "I need to go. Is there anything else?" I stood too, surprisingly calm. "Just one thing. I forgive you." He blinked, genuinely taken aback. "What?" "I forgive you," I repeated. "Not for your sake, but for mine. I'm not carrying this anger anymore. It's too heavy, and you're not worth it." For a moment, he looked almost lost, as if no one had ever spoken to him that way before. Then the mask slipped back into place. "Well, good for you, I suppose." I nodded. "Goodbye, Dad." He hesitated, then gave a curt nod in return. "Goodbye, Camille." As I watched him walk away, I realized it was probably the last time I would ever see him. And surprisingly, that was okay. The conversation hadn't gone exactly as I'd planned. He hadn't broken down in remorse, hadn't begged for forgiveness, hadn't suddenly transformed into the loving father I had once desperately wanted. But I had said what I needed to say. I had stood up for myself, named his cruelty for what it was, and refused to take responsibility for his emotional limitations. I felt lighter somehow, as if I had set down a burden I had been carrying for far too long. The pain wasn't gone entirely. I suspected it never would be completely, but it had transformed into something manageable, something that no longer defined me. As I left the coffee shop and stepped into the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt something I hadn't expected: hope. Not hope that my father would change, but hope for my own future, free from the shadow of his rejection. I was ready to move forward, ready to build the family I had always wanted, one founded on love, acceptance, and presence. And in that moment, despite everything, I felt grateful. Grateful that I had found the strength to face my father. Grateful for the family I had chosen, and who had chosen me in return. Grateful that the cycle of rejection would end with me. The holiday season arrived with its usual flurry of decorations, parties, and family gatherings. It was our first Christmas as a married couple, and Daniel and I were hosting both his parents and my mother and stepfather for Christmas Eve dinner. Our modest home was transformed with twinkling lights, fragrant pine garlands, and the 7-foot tree that Daniel had insisted we needed, despite the fact that it took up a quarter of our living room. As I prepared the dining room table, setting out the good china we'd received as a wedding gift, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was our home, our family, our tradition in the making. The confrontation with my father 2 months earlier had freed something in me. I felt more present, more capable of joy, less haunted by the past. The doorbell rang promptly at 6, and Daniel's parents arrived bearing gifts and a homemade pecan pie. Janet, Daniel's mother, immediately enveloped me in a warm hug. "The house looks beautiful, Camille," she said, surveying the decorations with approval. "You two have done a wonderful job." "Thanks," I replied, genuinely pleased by her praise. We wanted everything to be special for our first Christmas together. Robert, Daniel's father, patted me affectionately on the shoulder as he passed, heading straight to the kitchen to help Daniel with the drinks. The easy affection between Daniel and his parents had been one of the first things I'd noticed about his family. The casual touches, the inside jokes, the obvious pride they took in their son. It had been both comforting and painful to witness, a glimpse of what a healthy parent-child relationship could look like. My mother and Tom arrived soon after, Mom fussing over the cold and Tom carrying a large bag of carefully wrapped presents. Unlike Janet, who had simply admired the decorations, my mother immediately began straightening ornaments on the tree and adjusting the garland on the mantel. "Mom," I said with a laugh, gently taking her hands to still them. "Everything's fine. Relax." She gave me a sheepish smile. "Sorry, honey. Force of habit. The place really does look lovely." We all gathered in the living room for appetizers and drinks, the conversation flowing easily. My mother and Janet had become friendly since the wedding, bonding over their shared experience as mothers-in-law and their mutual love of gardening. Tom and Robert discovered a shared interest in vintage cars and were deep in conversation about a restoration project Tom had recently completed. Watching them all together, I felt a wave of gratitude. This was family. Not perfect, not without its complications, but bound by genuine love and respect. I caught Daniel's eye across the room, and he winked at me, as if he knew exactly what I was thinking. Dinner was a success, the turkey golden and moist, the sides plentiful and delicious. We lingered at the table long after the meal was finished, sharing stories and laughing together. At one point, Tom raised his glass in a toast. "To Camille and Daniel," he said, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Thank you for bringing us all together in your beautiful home. May this be the first of many happy Christmases as a family." Everyone raised their glasses in agreement, and I felt a lump form in my throat. This was what I had always wanted, to be surrounded by people who chose to be there, who valued me, who showed up not out of obligation, but out of love. Later, As we cleaned up the kitchen together, my mother broached the subject I had been expecting all evening. "Have you heard anything from your father?" she asked, keeping her voice low so the others wouldn't hear. I shook my head. "No. And I don't expect to. Our meeting was final." She nodded, looking relieved. "Good. After what he did at your wedding? Well, I think you're better off without him in your life." "I know I am," I said with quiet certainty. "It took me a long time to accept that, but I finally have." My mother squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, Camille. So proud of the woman you've become." After everyone had gone home and Daniel and I were curled up on the couch, watching the lights twinkle on the tree, I shared my thoughts about the evening. "It felt right," I told him. "All of us together, like a real family." He pressed a kiss to my temple. "It was perfect. And just think, next year there might be one more person at the table." I looked at him questioningly, and he smiled, a hint of nervousness in his eyes. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time we start trying for a baby. What do you think?" The idea sent a flutter of both excitement and anxiety through me. Despite the progress I'd made in therapy, the specter of my father still haunted my thoughts about parenthood. What if I inherited his emotional distance? What if I couldn't connect with my child? Daniel sensed my hesitation. "Talk to me," he said gently. "What are you thinking?" I took a deep breath. "I want children with you." "I do. But I'm scared, Daniel." "What if I'm like him?" "You won't be," he said with absolute certainty. "Camille, I've seen you with our nieces and nephews. I've seen how you are with Jessica's kids. You're natural, loving, patient. You're nothing like your father." "But what if—" "No what ifs," he interrupted. "You are not your father. You have so much love to give. Our children will be the luckiest kids in the world to have you as their mother." I wanted to believe him. And maybe, finally, I was starting to. The past 6 months had been a journey of healing, of reclaiming my self-worth from the ruins of my relationship with my father, of understanding that his limitations were not my destiny. "Okay," I said finally, a smile spreading across my face. "Let's do it. Let's start trying." Daniel's face lit up with joy and he pulled me into a tight embrace. "Really? You're sure?" I nodded against his shoulder. "I'm sure. I want to build our family, Daniel. I want to show our children what real love looks like." That night, as I lay in bed listening to Daniel's steady breathing beside me, I felt a profound sense of peace. The decision to try for a baby felt right, like the next natural step in healing from my father's rejection. I would be the parent I had always wanted. Present, supportive, loving. I would break the cycle. The new year began with purpose. Daniel and I dove into the project of becoming parents with the same enthusiasm we brought to everything in our lives. We read books on fertility and conception, adjusted our diets, started taking prenatal vitamins on my doctor's recommendation. Each month brought a mix of hope and disappointment as we waited for a positive pregnancy test. "It takes time," my doctor reassured me during my annual checkup in March. "Most healthy couples conceive within a year. Try to relax and enjoy the process." Easier said than done. Each negative test felt like a personal failure, though I tried not to let it affect me too deeply. Meanwhile, life continued its normal rhythms. Work kept me busy, with a new client demanding most of my creative energy. Daniel was promoted at the architectural firm where he worked, bringing new responsibilities and longer hours. It was during this time that an unexpected piece of news found its way to me. Jessica called one evening in early April, her voice hesitant. "I'm not sure if I should tell you this," she began, "but I thought you'd want to know. Your father is sick." My heart stuttered in my chest. "Sick? What do you mean sick?" "Cancer," Jessica said gently. "Pancreatic. My mom ran into his sister at the grocery store. Apparently, it's pretty advanced." I sat down heavily on the couch, unsure how to process this information. My father was sick, possibly dying. The man who had publicly disowned me, who had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with me, was facing his own mortality. What was I supposed to feel? "Camille, Are you still there? Jessica's voice brought me back to the present. Yeah, I'm here. I don't know what to do with this information. You don't have to do anything, she assured me. I just thought you should know. After we hung up, I sat in silence, trying to sort through my jumbled emotions. There was sadness, yes, a reflexive grief for the father I had never really had. But there was also anger that even in illness, he might once again demand emotional energy I was reluctant to give. And beneath it all, a surprising amount of numbness. When Daniel came home, I shared the news. Are you okay? He asked, sitting beside me on the couch. I considered the question carefully. I think so. It's strange. I feel like I should feel more than I do. Is that terrible of me? Daniel shook his head. No. After everything he's put you through, numbness is a pretty reasonable response. What should I do? I asked. Should I reach out to him? Try to see him? Daniel took my hands in his. That's entirely up to you, Camille. There's no right or wrong answer here. What do you want to do? I thought about our last meeting, about the closure I had found in forgiving him and walking away. Did I want to reopen that door? Risk more pain for both of us? Nothing, I decided finally. I don't want to do anything. He made his choice clear at the wedding and again when we met for coffee. If he wants to see me now, he knows how to reach me. Daniel nodded, supportive as always. Then that's what we'll do. Nothing. And for several weeks, that's exactly what we did. Life continued. Spring bloomed outside our windows. We celebrated our first wedding anniversary with a weekend trip to a charming bed and breakfast in the countryside. I thought about my father occasionally, wondering how he was doing, but not enough to break the silence between us. Then, in late May, I received a call from an unknown number. Is this Camille Donahue? A woman's voice asked when I answered. Yes, it is. This is Nurse Peterson from Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about Richard Donahue. You're listed as his emergency contact. I nearly dropped the phone in shock. I am? That must be a mistake. Are you his daughter? The nurse asked, sounding confused. Yes, but... I stopped, unsure how to explain the complexity of our relationship to a stranger. Yes, I'm his daughter. What's happened? Your father was admitted last night with complications from his cancer treatment. He's stable now, but he's asking to see you. My father was asking for me. After years of rejection, after publicly disowning me at my wedding, he wanted to see me now that he was sick. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'll think about it, I said finally. Thank you for calling. I hung up and immediately called Dr. Winters, grateful when she was able to fit me in for an emergency session that afternoon. He's using his illness to manipulate you, I said as soon as I sat down in her office. After all these years of pushing me away, now that he's sick, he suddenly wants me by his side? It's not fair. Dr. Winters nodded understanding. You're right that it's not fair. And you have every right to be angry about the timing. So you think I shouldn't go? I asked, seeking confirmation. I didn't say that, she replied carefully. What I think is that you need to make this decision based on what will bring you peace in the long run, not based on what your father deserves. I frowned, not quite understanding. What do you mean? I mean that this isn't about your father anymore, she explained. It's about you. If you don't go, will you regret it later? Will you wonder what he wanted to say to you? Will you wish you had given him one last chance, not for his sake but for your own closure? Her questions hit home. Despite everything, despite the hurt and rejection, a part of me was curious about why my father had asked for me now. What could he possibly have to say that he hadn't already made clear? I don't know if I'm strong enough to face him again, I admitted. What if he just wants to hurt me one more time before he goes? Dr. Winters leaned forward slightly. Camille, think about how far you've come. 6 months ago, your father's words at your wedding devastated you, but you survived. You confronted him. You've been working through your feelings about him in therapy. You're stronger now than you were then. She was right. I had grown. The desperate need for my father's approval that had defined so much of my life had diminished. I had built a life filled with love and support without him. Whatever his reason for calling me to his bedside, it couldn't break me anymore. I'll go, I decided. But I'm taking Daniel with me, and I'm going with clear boundaries. Dr. Winters smiled approvingly. That sounds like a healthy approach. That evening, Daniel and I drove to Memorial Hospital, my stomach in knots despite my determination to stay strong. In the elevator up to the oncology floor, Daniel squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Remember, we can leave any time you want," he said. "Just say the word." I nodded gratefully. Having him by my side made everything more bearable. We found my father's room easily enough. I hesitated at the threshold, taking in the sight of him lying in the hospital bed. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by illness and the sterile hospital environment. His once robust frame had withered, his face gaunt and pale. For a moment, I felt nothing but pity. Then he turned his head and saw me, and something flickered in his eyes. Relief, perhaps, or surprise that I had actually come, and I realized that whatever happened next would change things between us forever, for better or worse. I took a deep breath and stepped into the room. "You came," my father said, his voice weaker than I remembered but still carrying that note of surprise, as if he couldn't quite believe I was standing there. "I came," I agreed, moving closer to his bed, but not too close. Daniel remained by the door, a silent, supportive presence. "The nurse said you wanted to see me." My father's gaze shifted briefly to Daniel, then back to me. "I didn't expect you to bring company." "Daniel is my husband," I said firmly. "Where I go, he goes. Especially here." A shadow of something, annoyance, resignation, perhaps even understanding, crossed my father's face. He nodded slightly. "Fair enough." An awkward silence fell. I waited, determined that he would be the one to break it. After all, he had asked for this meeting, not me. Finally, he sighed. "I suppose you're wondering why I asked you to come." The thought crossed my mind. I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the tension coiling in my chest. My father gestured weakly to a chair beside his bed. "Sit, please. This isn't easy for me." Reluctantly, I took the seat, maintaining a straight-backed posture that conveyed my wariness. He might be sick, but I wasn't about to let my guard down completely. "The doctors say I have 3 months," he began without preamble. "Maybe 6 with aggressive treatment, but the quality of life would be not worth it." He paused, as if waiting for a reaction, but I remained silent. "I've decided to decline further treatment, to let nature take its course." I nodded, unsure what response he expected. Was I supposed to argue? To tell him to fight? We were far beyond that kind of relationship. "I'm getting my affairs in order," he continued when I didn't speak, "making sure everything is properly arranged before I go." "And that involves me how?" I asked, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. "You made it very clear at my wedding that you don't consider me your daughter." My father had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I said some things that day that I regret." I nearly laughed. After all this time, after all the pain he had caused, the best he could offer was this vague acknowledgement. Not even a proper apology. "You humiliated me," I said, my voice low but intense. "On my wedding day, in front of everyone I care about. You disowned me publicly. And now you regret it? What exactly do you regret? Saying it out loud? Or feeling it in the first place?" My father looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "Both, I suppose." I waited for more, for some explanation of why he had been so cruel, why he had rejected me so completely for so many years. But he remained silent, staring at the bland hospital wall as if it held answers he couldn't articulate. "Why did you ask me to come here?" I pressed, growing impatient with his reticence. "What do you want from me?" He turned back to me then, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I want to make things right before I go. As right as they can be, anyway." "And how exactly do you propose to do that?" I challenged. "You can't undo years of absence with one conversation. You can't take back what you said at my wedding. You can't suddenly decide to be a father when it's convenient for you. I know that, he said, a hint of his old sharpness returning. I'm not a fool, Camille. I know I've been less than what you deserved in a father. It was perhaps the closest thing to an admission of failure I had ever heard from him, and it momentarily stunned me into silence. The truth is, he continued, I never knew how to be a father. My own father was cold, distant. I had no model for what it meant to raise a child with warmth or affection. I didn't know how to connect with you, even when you were small. And after the divorce, it seemed easier to just step away entirely. Easier for you, maybe, I said. Not for me. Never for me. He nodded, acknowledging the truth of my words. I know, and I can't change that now, but I can try to make amends in the time I have left. How? I asked again. What could you possibly do now that would make up for everything? My father reached for a folder on his bedside table, wincing slightly with the effort. Practically speaking, I've changed my will. Everything I have will go to you. The house, my investments, the family heirlooms. It's not much in the grand scheme of things, but it's something tangible I can offer. I felt a surge of anger. I don't want your money. I don't want your house. I wanted a father. I wanted someone who showed up for school plays and graduations, who called on my birthday, who walked me down the aisle because he was proud, not because it was expected. I know, he said quietly, and I can't give you those things now. They're gone, those opportunities. All I can give you is what I have left. I stood up abruptly, too agitated to remain seated. This is exactly the problem. You still don't understand. It was never about material things. It was about presence, connection, love. My voice broke on the last word, and I hated myself for showing that vulnerability. Daniel moved toward me, concern written on his face, but I shook my head slightly. I needed to finish this on my own. I forgave you, I reminded my father. When we met for coffee, I told you I forgave you. Not for your sake, but for mine. And I meant it. I've been working hard to move on with my life, to build something beautiful despite the foundation you gave me. And now you want to swoop in at the end and, what, be absolved? Feel better about yourself before you go? No, my father protested, though not very convincingly. I just thought, I wanted to try to make things right. Things will never be right between us, I said, the words painful but necessary. Too much has happened. Too much time has passed. The best we can hope for is peace. He seemed to deflate at that, as if the last bit of fight had gone out of him. Peace, he repeated. Yes, I suppose that's all that's left. I looked at him then, really looked at him. This withered, diminished man who had loomed so large in my psyche for so long. And I felt a rush of complex emotions. Pity, residual anger, but also a strange sort of compassion. In the end, his coldness had cost him far more than it had cost me. I had built a life full of love and connection. What did he have? I'll accept your will as it is, I said finally. Not because I want or need what you're leaving, but because I understand it's the only way you know how to try to make amends. But I want you to understand something clearly. I'm not doing this for the inheritance. I'm doing it because despite everything, I still hoped someday you might be the father I needed. That hope was misplaced. But it was real. My father nodded slowly. Thank you, he said, the words sounding rusty, unpracticed. And Camille, I am sorry, for everything. I know it's not enough, but I am. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But it was something. The first genuine apology he had ever offered me. I accepted it for what it was. Not the dramatic reconciliation I had once dreamed of, but a small step toward the peace we both needed. I should go, I said, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of our conversation. Do you need anything else from me right now? He shook his head. No, but would you come back? Before the end? The request caught me off guard. I hadn't expected him to want more contact, had assumed this conversation was meant to be our final goodbye. I'll think about it, I said honestly. That's all I can promise right now. He accepted this with a small nod. Fair enough. As Daniel and I left the hospital, I felt strangely hollow, as if something had been scooped out of me. Not in a painful way, but in the way clearing out an old, cluttered room might feel. Empty, but clean. Ready for something new. Are you okay? Daniel asked as we walked to the car. I considered the question carefully. I think so. It wasn't what I expected. He wasn't what I expected. In a good way or a bad way? Neither. Both. I sighed, struggling to articulate the complex emotions swirling within me. He's just a man, Daniel. A flawed, dying man who never figured out how to be a father. And all these years, I've been giving him so much power over how I feel about myself. Daniel squeezed my hand. So what happens now? I looked back at the hospital, its windows glowing against the darkening evening sky. I don't know. I really don't. But whatever happens, it will be my choice, not his. And in that moment, that felt like enough. The power to choose my own path forward, unburdened by the desperate need for approval that had shaped so much of my life. Whether I decided to visit my father again or not, whether I accepted his inheritance or donated it all to charity, the choice would be mine. And that, perhaps, was the most healing realization of all. The next few weeks passed in a blur of ordinary life. I threw myself into work, tackling a challenging new campaign for a major client. Daniel and I continued our efforts to conceive, though with less anxious intensity than before. My father's illness had put things in perspective. Life was unpredictable, precious. Better to enjoy the journey than fixate on the destination. I didn't return to the hospital immediately. I needed time to process our conversation, to decide what, if anything, I wanted from our remaining time together. Dr. Winters encouraged me to sit with my feelings, to not rush into decisions based on guilt or obligation. Remember, she said during one of our sessions, visiting your father in his final days should be about what brings you peace, not about what you think a good daughter would do. I nodded, grateful for her guidance. The thing is, I don't know what would bring me peace. More conversations like the last one? I'm not sure that would help either of us. What about asking questions? She suggested. Are there things you've always wanted to know about him, about your family history, about his life before you were born? The idea resonated with me. Despite our years of strained interaction, I knew surprisingly little about my father as a person. Perhaps understanding him better wouldn't erase the pain of our relationship, but it might help me make sense of it. So 2 weeks after our hospital conversation, I returned to see him, this time alone. Daniel offered to come, but I felt stronger now, more capable of facing my father without support. The change in him was shocking even in the short time that had passed. He had lost more weight, his skin had a grayish pallor, and his breathing seemed labored. The aggressive cancer was taking its toll quickly. I wasn't sure you'd come back, he said when he saw me. Neither was I admitted, taking the same chair I had occupied during my previous visit. An awkward silence fell between us. I had come with questions, but now that I was here, I wasn't sure how to begin. How are you feeling? I asked finally, defaulting to politeness. Like I'm dying, he replied with unexpected frankness. Some days are better than others. Today is not great. I nodded, unsure how to respond to his bluntness. Should I come back another time? No, he said quickly, then seemed embarrassed by his eagerness. No, stay, please, if you want to. I settled back in my chair. I've been thinking about what you said last time, about not knowing how to be a father because of your own father. Tell me about him, about your childhood. My father looked surprised by the request, but after a moment's hesitation, he began to speak. He told me about growing up in a household where emotions were considered weaknesses, where his father's approval was contingent on achievement, never freely given. He described the strict discipline, the high expectations, the absence of physical affection. I swore I'd be different, he said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. When your mother told me she was pregnant, I promised myself I wouldn't be like him. But then you were born, and I found myself falling into the same patterns. I didn't know how to connect with you. I didn't know how to show warmth. You could have learned, I pointed out. Mom did. She wasn't raised in a particularly affectionate home either, but she figured it out. My father sighed. Your mother is stronger than I am. Always has been. When things got hard, when I realized I was becoming my father despite my best intentions, I retreated. It seemed kinder, somehow, to remove myself than to stay and continue the cycle. It wasn't kinder, I said quietly. It was just easier. For you. He didn't deny it. Yes. It was cowardice, plain and simple. I told myself I was protecting you from becoming like me, but really, I was protecting myself from having to change, from having to face my own inadequacies. His admission stunned me. I had never expected such self-awareness from him, such candid acknowledgement of his failures. It didn't excuse what he had done, but it helped me understand it better. We talked for over an hour that day. I asked about his childhood, his marriage to my mother, his life after the divorce. He answered everything with a frankness that would have been unthinkable before his illness. It was as if the proximity of death had stripped away his usual defenses, allowing a glimpse of the man beneath the cold exterior. As I was preparing to leave, he asked a question of his own. Do you and Daniel plan to have children? The question caught me off guard. We're trying, I admitted. No luck yet, but we're hopeful. He nodded, something like sadness crossing his face. You'll be a good mother, Camille. Better than I was a father. I plan to be, I said, not unkindly but firmly. I have no doubt. He hesitated, then added, I'm sorry I won't get to meet them. Your children. The statement held a finality that made my throat tighten unexpectedly. Despite everything, there was something deeply sad about my father acknowledging he wouldn't live to see the next generation of our family. Me too, I said, surprising myself with the sincerity of the words. I visited my father several more times over the next month. Our conversations continued in much the same vein, me asking questions, him answering with uncharacteristic openness. We didn't discuss the wedding incident again, nor did we try to force a false closeness that would have felt dishonest to both of us. Instead, we existed in a strange limbo of neither reconciliation nor estrangement, finding a tentative peace in the simple act of conversation. During one visit, I found him particularly weak, barely able to sit up in bed. The nurse warned me he had had a bad night, that the pain was becoming more difficult to manage. You don't have to stay, he said when he saw my concern. I'm not great company today. It's okay, I assured him. We don't have to talk. I can just sit with you for a while. He seemed grateful for the offer. For nearly an hour, we sat in companionable silence, him drifting in and out of sleep, me reading a book I had brought along. It was perhaps the most peaceful time we had ever spent together, unmarred by expectations or disappointments. As I was preparing to leave, he stirred and reached for my hand. The gesture was so unexpected that I froze momentarily before hesitantly placing my hand in his. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For coming, for asking questions, for trying to understand. I nodded, unsure how to respond to this unprecedented vulnerability. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, he continued, or your time, but I'm grateful for both. I didn't do it for you. I reminded him gently. I did it for me, to find peace. Have you? He asked. Found peace, I mean. I considered the question carefully. I think I'm getting there. Not because of anything you've said or done, but because I'm learning to accept that you are who you are. You weren't the father I needed, and that will always be painful. But I'm building a good life despite that. I'm surrounding myself with people who love me completely and unconditionally. And I'm learning that your inability to be that person says more about you than it does about me. He winced slightly at my words, but nodded in acknowledgement. You've become an extraordinary woman, Camille. Strong, resilient, clear-eyed. I can't take any credit for that, but I can recognize it. Coming from him, it was high praise indeed. Perhaps the most genuine compliment he had ever paid me. I felt an unexpected warmth spread through my chest, not because I needed his approval, but because, for once, he was seeing me clearly. "Thank you," I said simply. He squeezed my hand weakly, then released it. "You should go. Your husband will be waiting." I stood, gathering my things. "I'll come back on Thursday, if you'd like." "I'd like that," he said, his eyes already drifting closed with fatigue. But my father didn't make it to Thursday. The call came Wednesday morning as I was preparing for work. The night nurse had found him unresponsive during her 4 a.m. rounds. The official cause of death was listed as complications from pancreatic cancer, but the doctor who called suggested it was simply that his body had given up the fight. I took the news with a strange calmness. There were no dramatic tears, no collapse, no overwhelming guilt that I hadn't been there at the end. Just a quiet sadness for a relationship that had never been what it should have been, for opportunities forever lost, for wounds that would now have to heal without the closure of reconciliation. Daniel held me that night as I finally cried, not for the father I had lost, but for the father I had never had, for the little girl who had waited by the window for visits that never came, for the teenager who had scanned the audience at her graduation in vain, for the bride who had been publicly rejected on what should have been the happiest day of her life. "I thought I'd have more time with him," I admitted through my tears. Not to fix everything, I knew that wasn't possible, but to understand him better, to maybe reach some kind of peace between us. "I think you did," Daniel said, stroking my hair. "Maybe not completely, maybe not the way you imagined, but those conversations you had these past few weeks, they meant something. To both of you." I nodded against his chest, grateful for his perspective. They did. They weren't enough, but they were something. More than I ever expected to have with him. The funeral was a small affair. My father had few close friends, and many of his colleagues sent flowers rather than attending in person. My mother came, somewhat to my surprise, as did Tom. Daniel's parents attended as well, a gesture of support that touched me deeply. As I stood by the grave, watching the polished wooden casket being lowered into the ground, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief, yes, but also relief that the complicated dance of our relationship had finally ended. And beneath it all, a quiet determination to take the lessons of my father's life, both positive and negative, and use them to shape my own. "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered as I tossed a handful of dirt onto the casket. "I hope you found peace." It wasn't the relationship I had wanted, not by a long shot. But in those final weeks, we had found a way to exist in each other's lives without causing more harm. And perhaps in the end, that was the best we could have hoped for. As I turned away from the grave, Daniel's arms solid around my waist, I felt something shift inside me. A weight lifting, a door closing gently but firmly on the past. My father was gone, but I remained. And I had a life to live, a family to build, a future to embrace. It was time to move forward. 1 year later, I stood in what had once been my father's study, now transformed into a nursery. The dark wood paneling had been replaced with soft blue walls adorned with whimsical cloud decals. The imposing desk where he had spent countless hours working had given way to a white crib with a mobile of stars and moons. The transformation was complete, symbolic of the changes in my own life. After the funeral, I had inherited everything as my father had promised. The house, his investments, family heirlooms that had meant little to him but carried generations of history. Daniel and I had debated what to do with it all. The money we partly donated to pancreatic cancer research, partly invested for our future. The house we had initially planned to sell, but something held me back. "We could renovate it," Daniel suggested one evening as we walked through the empty rooms. "Make it ours. Turn it into the home your father never made it." The idea had appealed to me more than I expected. A chance to reclaim the space, to fill it with warmth and laughter and love, all the things it had lacked during my father's lifetime. So we had embarked on a massive renovation project, gutting most of the interior while preserving the beautiful bones of the century-old colonial. And now, a year after my father's death, we were weeks away from welcoming our first child into the world. The nursery was ready, painted and furnished with a mixture of new items and family pieces I had refinished myself. The antique rocking chair that had belonged to my grandmother stood in the corner, reupholstered in a soft gray fabric. On the wall hung a quilt my mother had made, incorporating scraps from my baby clothes and even a few of my father's old ties, a tangible link to both sides of my heritage. My pregnancy had been confirmed just 2 months after the funeral, as if my body had been waiting for that chapter to close before beginning another. The timing had felt right somehow, a natural progression from loss to new life. Dr. Winters had helped me work through my lingering anxieties about parenthood, my fear of repeating patterns, my determination to be the parent my father never was. "You're already breaking the cycle," she had assured me during one of our sessions. "By acknowledging these fears, by working through them consciously, you're taking steps your father never took." As my due date approached, I found myself thinking about my father more often, wondering what he would have made of this impending grandchild he would never meet. Would the prospect of a grandchild have softened him? Would he have found it easier to connect with a new generation, free from the complicated history that had defined our relationship? I would never know. What I did know was that my child would grow up surrounded by love, from Daniel, from my mother and Tom, from Daniel's parents, from our circle of supportive friends. My baby would never question their worth, never wonder if they were enough, never feel the sting of rejection from a parent who couldn't or wouldn't connect. A gentle kick from within reminded me of the precious life I carried. I placed my hand on my rounded belly, smiling at the flutter of movement beneath my palm. "He's active today," Daniel observed as he entered the nursery, carrying a box of newly arrived baby clothes. "Just letting us know he's there," I replied. We had decided not to learn the baby's sex, preferring the surprise, but Daniel was convinced we were having a boy. He set down the box and wrapped his arms around me from behind, his hands joining mine on my belly. "How are you feeling today?" "Good," I said, leaning back against his chest. "Tired, but good." We stood together for a moment, savoring the quiet anticipation of these final weeks before our lives would change forever. Then Daniel gently turned me to face him. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "A gift." He pulled out a small velvet box and handed it to me. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with 3 interlocking circles, a larger one flanked by 2 smaller ones. "It's a family necklace," Daniel explained. "The 3 circles represent you, me, and the baby. I thought it might be a symbol of the family we're creating together. The family you've always deserved." Tears welled in my eyes as I lifted the necklace from its box. "It's beautiful, Daniel. Thank you." He helped me fasten it around my neck, the gentle weight of it resting just above my heart. It felt right there, a tangible reminder of the bonds that would define my life going forward. Later that evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, my mother called with news about the upcoming baby shower she and Janet were planning together. Their friendship had deepened over the past year, united by their shared excitement about becoming grandmothers. "Janet found the most adorable cake topper," my mother gushed. "And Tom's building a rocking horse as a gift. He's been working on it for weeks." I smiled at her enthusiasm. My mother had blossomed since my father's death, as if freed from the last vestiges of their difficult marriage. She and Tom had recently bought a small cottage just 15 minutes from our house, eager to be close when the baby arrived. "It sounds wonderful, Mom," I said. "Thank you for doing all this." "Oh, honey, we're just so happy for you and Daniel," she replied, her voice warm. "This baby is going to be so loved." After we hung up, I sat quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The path had been far from straight or easy. The wounds inflicted by my father's rejection would always be part of me, scars that had shaped who I was. But they no longer defined me. They no longer limited what I could give or receive in terms of love. "Penny for your thoughts," Daniel said, breaking my reverie. I turned to him with a smile. I was just thinking about family. About how it's not always what we expect or hope for. About how sometimes we have to build our own. He nodded, understanding. And we've built a good one, I think. Chapter 8. Continued. We have, I agreed, taking his hand in mine. The best one. The weeks passed quickly after that, filled with final preparations for the baby's arrival. Daniel and I attended childbirth classes, assembled furniture, washed tiny clothes, and gradually adjusted to the idea that soon, very soon, we would be parents. My due date came and went with no sign of labor. 5 days later, just as we were discussing induction with my doctor, my water broke in the middle of dinner. The contractions began soon after, mild at first, but quickly intensifying. Daniel remained calm and focused, timing contractions, packing last-minute items into the hospital bag, calling our families with updates. The drive to the hospital was surreal. The dark roads empty at that late hour, streetlights casting intermittent glows across Daniel's determined profile as he drove, me breathing through increasingly powerful contractions in the passenger seat. Everything after that became a blur of pain, determination, and ultimately, overwhelming joy. After 16 hours of labor, our daughter was born. 7 pounds, 8 ounces of pink-skinned, dark-haired perfection. When the doctor placed her on my chest, still slippery and wailing her displeasure at entering the world, time seemed to stop. I stared down at her tiny face, her button nose, her rosebud mouth, and felt a love so fierce and protective it took my breath away. "She's beautiful," Daniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he leaned over us. "Just like her mother." We named her Charlotte Susan, after Daniel's grandmother and my mother. As I held her in those first precious hours, counting her fingers and toes, marveling at the perfection of her tiny fingernails, I made silent promises to her. That she would always know she was loved, unconditionally and completely. That she would grow up secure in her place in our family. That she would never doubt her worth or her belonging. The first weeks of Charlotte's life passed in a sleep-deprived haze of feedings, diaper changes, and long stretches of simply watching her sleep. Family and friends visited, bearing gifts and meals and offers of help. My mother practically moved in for the first 2 weeks, showing me how to swaddle Charlotte properly, encouraging me through difficult nursing sessions, assuring me that my instincts were good when I doubted myself. Daniel proved to be a natural father, taking to his new role with confidence and joy. He handled midnight feedings with patience, sang off-key lullabies that somehow always soothed Charlotte, and looked at our daughter with such pure adoration that it often brought tears to my eyes. One night, as we sat together in the nursery that had once been my father's study, Charlotte asleep in my arms after a feeding, Daniel brought up a subject we hadn't discussed since before her birth. "Have you thought about your father much, since Charlotte was born?" I nodded slowly. More than I expected to, honestly. There are moments when I look at her and wonder what he would have thought of her, if she would have been the one to finally break through his walls. Daniel considered this. "Do you think she would have?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I'd like to think so. She's pretty magical." I smiled down at our sleeping daughter, her little rosebud mouth making sucking motions even in sleep. But then I remember how he was at our wedding, how he could be so cold even in what should have been joyful moments, and I'm not sure. Maybe he was just incapable of that kind of connection. Or maybe he never gave himself the chance to try, Daniel suggested gently. Maybe by pushing everyone away, he missed out on the experiences that might have changed him. There was wisdom in his words. My father had spent a lifetime building walls between himself and others, protecting himself from vulnerability, but also cutting himself off from the very experiences that might have healed his own childhood wounds. In rejecting connection, he had rejected growth, change, the possibility of becoming more than the sum of his past. "I've been thinking," I said slowly, "about writing him a letter. Not to send, obviously, but just to say all the things I never got to say, to tell him about Charlotte, to let go of the last of the anger I've been carrying." Daniel smiled encouragingly. "I think that's a wonderful idea." A week later, when Charlotte was napping and Daniel had gone to pick up groceries, I sat down at the small desk in our bedroom with a pen and paper. For a moment, I just stared at the blank page, unsure where to begin. Then, taking a deep breath, I started to write. Dear Dad, you've been gone for over a year now, and in that time, so much has changed. The biggest change is currently asleep in the nursery that used to be your study. Your granddaughter, Charlotte Susan. She's 6 weeks old today, with dark hair and eyes that are starting to turn brown. Daniel thinks she has my nose and your chin, though I'm not sure about that last part. I wish you could have met her. Not the you that I knew, distant, cold, unable to connect, but the you that might have been, if things had been different. I like to think that Charlotte would have softened something in you, that her innocent love might have reached places in your heart that I never could. For a long time, I was angry with you. For leaving when I was 16, for missing all the important moments, for what you said at my wedding. That anger served a purpose for a while. It protected me, gave me something to hold on to when the hurt was too much to bear. But I don't need it anymore. Having Charlotte has helped me understand some things about you. Not excuse them, but understand them. I now know the overwhelming love a parent can feel for their child. It's instinctive, powerful, almost frightening in its intensity. And I realize now that you must have been deeply wounded yourself to be unable to feel that, or to show it if you did. What happened between us wasn't my fault. I know that now with a certainty I never had before. Nothing a child could do would deserve the rejection you gave me. Nothing would justify the words you spoke at my wedding. That was your brokenness speaking, not my worthiness being questioned. In a strange way, I'm grateful for the lessons our difficult relationship taught me. Because of you, I know exactly what kind of parent I want to be. Present, supportive, emotionally available. Because of you, I recognize the value of the loving family I've built with Daniel. Because of you, I understand that love is a choice we make every day, in small moments and large ones. I'm raising your granddaughter in the house where you lived most of your adult life, but it's not the same place anymore. We've filled it with light and color and laughter. The rooms that felt cold and formal are now warm and welcoming. It's become a home, not just a house. I'm not writing this to make you feel bad, wherever you are. I'm writing because I need to say these things, to acknowledge both the pain of our relationship and my determination that it will not define my future or Charlotte's. I'm writing to let go of the last of my anger, to release both of us from the patterns that kept us locked in mutual hurt. In the end, despite everything, I hope you found peace, and I hope you know that I have found mine, your daughter, Camille. I read over the letter once, tears blurring my vision slightly, then folded it carefully and placed it in an envelope. I didn't seal it or address it. There was no need. This wasn't meant to be sent. It was meant to be a release, a final unburdening. That evening, after Charlotte was asleep, Daniel and I built a small fire in the backyard fire pit. As the flames crackled and rose against the darkening sky, I took out the letter. "Are you sure?" Daniel asked, his arm around my shoulders. I nodded. "I'm sure. It's time." I tossed the envelope into the fire and watched as the flames caught the edges, curling the paper, gradually consuming the words I had written. It felt right, symbolic of the final release of old pain, old patterns, old expectations. As we stood there watching the letter burn away to ash, I felt Charlotte's necklace against my skin, the 3 interlocking circles representing our little family, Daniel, Charlotte, and me. Connected by choice, by love, by daily acts of care and presence. My father had never understood that kind of connection. He had lived his life in isolation, missing out on the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of family. But his story didn't have to be mine. I had broken the cycle. I had chosen a different path. The fire burned low, the letter long since turned to ash. Daniel squeezed my shoulder gently. "Ready to go in?" I nodded, turning away from the dying embers. "Yes. Let's go home." We walked back to the house together, its windows glowing with warm light against the evening darkness. Inside, Our daughter slept peacefully, unaware of the history that had preceded her, the healing her existence had helped complete. She would grow up knowing only love and security, her place in our family never in question. As I checked on Charlotte one last time before bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, I whispered a final promise, not just to her, but to myself. You will always know you are loved. Always. And in that moment, the circle was complete. The past acknowledged, but released. The future bright with possibility. The present perfect in its simple truth. We were family. And that was enough.